the newsagents.
The Home Secretary has undermined the Metropolitan Police, has defied the Prime Minister, has made extraordinary comments about Northern Ireland. Do you back her, and is she adding to the credibility, the important credibility, of your government?
Well, as many other Cabinet Ministers have said, the words that she used are not words that I myself would have used, but I have a productive relationship with her as a colleague, and I've always given her the money that she needs to fund the police, bring down crime, and to fund the immigration and asylum system.
That was Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, being interviewed on Friday, adding to the now cascade of Cabinet voices, essentially saying that how the Home Secretary expressed herself about her own departmental area was wrong. We now have a government apparently ranged against itself. For Sunak, who promised order, he is the patron of someone who ignites chaos. This is an uncomfortable position, to say the least, but at the time of recording, Suella Braverman remains. The government's collective view about something as fundamental as to whether or not the police show bias, something as fundamental as equal justice, is confused. We're going to be taking you through where we are with this story and what happens next, but also offer you an alternative take, hopefully something of a bigger picture, where, in a way, Suella Braverman is only the microcosm, a symptom of a bigger malaise. That half of the government's problem, perhaps, again and again, is that they don't understand the forces which have taken them to where they are, to office. They don't understand the public, or even sometimes their own voters, that they think the voters, especially the working class ones, are a caricature of themselves. And so the politics they offer, caricature as well, and perhaps taking them to defeat. It's Lewis here. Welcome to the Newsagents. Now, before we get onto that idea, a reminder of where we are. Suella Braverman writes a piece which fundamentally calls into question the role of the police, the principle of their operational independence of ministers. She basically says in the Times that the police are playing favourites between protest groups, not that there's much evidence for that. Number 10 asks for some of these lines to be changed in advance. Some are, but some aren't. And 24 hours or so on, the Prime Minister is still expressing full confidence in her, despite the fact that apparently he and all of the other senior ministers disagree with her about these fundamental questions. Now, we thought it would be useful to give you a sense of where we are with opinion on the Conservative backbenches, because that matters in terms of what happens next. The whips have been checking their thinking, as you'd expect. Though there is a wing of the party who is supportive of Suella Braverman, talking to Tory MPs on and off the record over the last 24 hours, mainstream opinion appears to range from apoplexy to frustration to despond, more over the tone of what she says as much as the content, her constant ability to hog the limelight for what they think are her own long-term ends. For that limelight not to be on Labour and their Gaza divisions, which are in substantive terms actually greater. Tim Loughton is the MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, senior backbencher, most senior Conservative member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, so he knows Suella Braverman and her work well. He is a good barometer of quite a bit of the parliamentary party. To get straight to the point, do you think the Home Secretary's position is tenable?
She's not making it easy, I have to say, and this needs to come to a head. It's doing quite a lot of damage. We cannot have senior members of the Cabinet, on the face of it, defying number 10 and applying her own agenda. And some of the comments she has made have been unhelpful, and many of us are getting emails from constituents to that effect as well. So it needs to stop.
Do you agree with the thrust of her piece in the Times that the police show bias towards particular causes over others?
I don't have the evidence for that. And look, I've been very critical of the Met and the current commissioner. We've had him in front of Home Affairs Select Committee, which I sit on several times. And I have reservations about their handling of some of the protests, everything from Just Stop Oil to some of the other big demonstrations, as to whether they should have been more proactive, whether more people should have been arrested. But the situation is, this is an operational matter. You have to trust in this case, the Commissioner of the Met, to make a value judgment as to whether public order can be maintained, whether the safety of the public and the safety of the officers can be maintained. And that judgment he has made, which can change at this stage, is that it can go ahead within the law. Now, on that basis, if you don't agree with the Met Commissioner, then you've got to have very good grounds for it, or you sack him. And she just needs to, I think, take a step back, unless she has got very strong grounds to suggest that this really is going to get out of hand, is going to infringe the law, and therefore shouldn't take place. And the reality is, I'm afraid, whether you and I want this to take place, and I'd rather it didn't take place, and I don't think it's going to do the cause any good, because this is a very special weekend. If the organisers want to go ahead with it, then in a democracy, we have to respect free speech and everything that stands for, even if people want to be disrespectful, as I think this is on a very special Armistice Day.
Do you think that in the way that she is conducting herself and the way that she is acting, that she is jeopardising the principle of the operational independence of the police, which, of course, as you know, is a very important principle in the way that our government and our democracy works?
Yes, and I think that's the point I've just made, that there needs to be a clear distinction between policy and direction, which is a responsibility of ministers, and in which also the Mayor of London has a responsibility within the chain of command for the Met, and the police getting on with their job as they best see fit to handle it. This is a deeply difficult situation, Liz. You're going to have tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people converging on the capital, and you're going to have thousands, tens of thousands of police to manage that. That is not easy. There will be most people there who I'm sure are genuine in their intentions, or some of us would say they're wrong-headed in what they're trying to do. But there will be others trying to take advantage of the situation, others who are extremists, others who do want to spread hate and are likely to endeavour to commit crimes. But you've got to make a value judgment as how you can handle all of that, and it's not easy for the police. So, frankly, pouring any doubt on in the police is in danger of undermining the credibility of them being able to get on with that job, and that's the last thing we want. I want a peace. If this demonstration has to go ahead, I prefer it didn't this weekend. Then we need a peaceful demonstration, well managed, and any of those who are clearly infringing the law to be arrested either then or subsequently based on evidence which the police can then get together.
Do you think you've addressed the fact that this is a very difficult situation ever since the initial appalling attacks from Hamas into Israel and the week since the opinion has been inflamed in this country, very divisive period, understandably. Do you think that the Home Secretary has made that worse rather than better in the way that she's spoken about these events and about these marches?
Well, I don't want to get too hung up on words, although it's important that people use appropriate and moderate language. And I think what is really important at this difficult time across the world, which has been polarizing and which has raised huge sensitivities and emotions for people, understandably, that we need to try to bring people together rather than drive a wedge between them. I would like to see more people who are sympathetic to the Palestinian cause, and I'm sympathetic to the Palestinian cause in terms of having a two-state solution, being able to say what Hamas did was absolutely inhumane and unacceptable, and in no way represents what the vast majority of decent, moderate Palestinians stand for. And there needs to be a not in my name movement, very loud and very clear. If we had that alongside these demonstrations coming from those organizations who are responsible for these demonstrations, I think it would give them far greater credibility, and we could all rally around that. We can then make criticisms of what the government of Israel is doing. I've been critical of the government of Israel in the past and its excesses, but it absolutely has the right to defend itself. We need to scrutinise very closely whether it's taking that right too far. But let's, for goodness sake, concentrate on what we can agree on to find some consensus rather than adding to the
isn't the Home Secretary making that impossible? She's making that process harder, isn't she, in the way that she is talking about these things? You've just talked about the need to bring people together. She's one of the forces pushing people apart.
I don't agree that she's a force pushing people apart.
Hate marches?
But But referring in general terms to hate marches is not helpful and not accurate. Whether or not we agree with most of those people there, I think most of those people have genuine concerns, and we need to have a genuine debate as to how well informed those concerns are. Within those, there are people whose only interest is in spreading hate and promoting violence against Jews and others. And it's a question of how much they are hijacking and are organising behind the scenes to promote that hate within those marches. But they are not. I wouldn't use the term hate marches, but there are certainly hate elements who are taking advantages of those marches, and the organisers need to be sensitive to that, which is why using this weekend above all weekends to promote this march is highly inappropriate, and I think will be counterproductive to the cause they're trying to promote.
But the government can't go on this way. The Prime Minister, the Chancellor, the Transport Secretary, other senior ministers, senior Conservative backbenchers such as yourself, are saying that they don't agree with the way that the Home Secretary has characterised the police and its actions. And she's the Home Secretary. Do you think the Prime Minister at this point, 24 hours on, really ought to dismiss her or move her to another position?
That is for the Prime Minister to decide, and I don't comment on whether people should be removed or not. There's also some logistical issues about the timing of any reshuffle, if this would be part of a bigger reshuffle, which has been rumoured for some time. Obviously, we've got the marches that are still going to happen this weekend. Hopefully, they'll pass peacefully. If they didn't, and the Home Secretary had been removed, then I think there may be something of a backlash and the people saying, well, she told you so. We also have a very important announcement on Wednesday to do with the Supreme Court judgment over the Rwanda flights as well, which is directly relevant to the Home Office and the Home Secretary. So I think all of those things need to be looked at in the round before the Prime Minister makes any decisions. But those are decisions for him, not for me.
Do you think she's trying to get dismissed? A lot of speculation about her potential future leadership ambitions. Do you think she's just trying to push the boundaries as far as possible?
Who knows? I'm sure you'll ask her that directly at the appropriate time, Liz.
Well, we would love to very much. We'll see if we can track her down this weekend. What is your sense? I'm sure you're talking to some of your colleagues. There's a lot of speculation about a certain level of fury, at least from parts of the Conservative benches, more support from other parts of the Conservative Party. What do you think the consensus opinion, if there is one, on these events on the Tory benches?
I think the consensus opinion is one of exasperation. That we have got a huge challenge. We are in a very perilous position in the polls. We've had some bad by-elections, and an election is probably less than a year away now. The way you lose elections is to be divided and constantly internally looking and internally fighting. The public hates that, doesn't want to see that. And so when you have particular individuals, high-profile individuals, ministers and others, who appear to be singing from a different song sheet, that is really not helpful. We just all want a united cabinet and government and parliamentary party getting on with the important stuff that we're elected to do, and which at these really difficult times our constituents desperately want us to get on with. So this is a really unhelpful distraction, and it needs to stop.
You would urge her to think about the party over the course of the next year?
Absolutely. I mean, it's not just the party and the stability of the government, but it's what this is doing to the country as well. So some calmer, balanced, uniting voices at this stage is what we want.
So Tim, we're so grateful to you. Thank you so much. Well, you can hear from that, can't you? Just how strong opinion is. Suella Braverman, even for Conservative MPs, is as divisive as the views she holds. Right, when we come back, is the problem for Suella Braverman that she thinks she represents the country when perhaps she really doesn't? Stay with us. Right, now something we hear a lot when we hear about Suella Braverman and talk about Suella Braverman is the idea that she, while she might ruffle the feathers of the Westminster chattering classes, represents something bigger than them, something more authentic, something real, the way the British public really think about things, about home affairs, about the protests, about Gaza and everything else, that she's speaking in particular for the working class or real people, especially in the fabled so-called Red Wall. Take Deputy Tory Chairman Lee Anderson, someone else about whom it is often said is that he is more representative than his more mild-mannered colleagues. He tweeted this on Thursday.
Suella is guilty. Guilty of saying what most of us are thinking and saying. Thank goodness we have a Home Secretary who refuses to be cancelled.
Producer Gabriel there, who, as I think you can hear, is an absolute dead cert for Lee Anderson.
She's using everyday language used by everyday people. Labour MPs would know this if they got out more.
Is that really true? Is it really the case? How far does the bellicose politics of combat, which Suella Braverman embodies, actually reflect the voters in whose name it is done? Someone who follows the pulse of the nation closely through focus groups and polls week after week is Luke Tryl, formerly a Conservative special advisor himself, and he now works for the group More in Common. Luke, what do we know about to what extent Suella Braverman, in the attitudes that she takes and holds, let's just say about this matter with regards to Gaza and the protests and so on, how far it is A, representative of the public, and then B, of Conservative voters?
When you look at what Suella Braverman has come out with over the past few days and weeks, it's really important to distinguish between those different audiences. So if you look at Suella's approval ratings with the general public, they're very much underwater. She's actually not that popular with Conservative 2019 voters either, certainly compared to some other ministers. But then there's a third audience, which I think she's very clearly pitching at, which is the Tory base and the Tory membership. And I think if you look at those three audiences when it comes to the Israel-Gaza protest issue, the general public broadly take the view they want the police to tackle people who incite hate on marches, but also believe in the right to protest. Conservative 2019 voters, I think, certainly up for the police being a bit tough, but equally don't like the idea of restricting freedom of assembly and marches, and certainly wouldn't be comfortable with the idea of labelling the people that are on that march as, all of them as promoting hate. I think what Suella often gets wrong about that group of voters is that they have very strong belief in fair play. They want to see the rules enforced. So it's why they're so tough on crime. So they want to be tough on people who they think are abusing the asylum system. But they don't like going to extremes. They don't like being cruel. They don't like labelling people unfairly. And I think for lots of them, Suella's tone, if not the content of what she's saying, will be off-putting. But it's that third audience who I think are most likely to be receptive to what Suella's saying. We know that the Conservative membership is much more to the right than the public as a whole. It's likely to be more authoritarian. It's certainly changed in composition, even since the Cameron years. And I think among that audience, she's likely to be more popular. And I think that's what puts Sunak in such a bind, because his membership, his troops, the people he needs to help him win the election, are likely to be much more aligned to what Suella's saying than the public at large.
In terms of some of the other things that she said recently, one thinks of what she said about homelessness a little while before that, what she talked about an invasion on our southern coast and so on. So much of this stuff is often refracted and talked about at Westminster as if she is speaking on behalf of the public out there. Again, to what extent is her particular brand of politics, the way she talks about things and what she talks about, how reflective is that of public opinion?
Well, so we know, for instance, that when you poll people about homelessness being a lifestyle choice, not only, do the public as a whole not agree, she actually only gets about half of 2019 Tory voters agreeing that it's sometimes or always a lifestyle choice. Now, that is not an insignificant constituency, but if the Tories are only appealing to half of their 2019 base, their chances of winning the next election are completely out of the window. They need to be going much further than that. And what we also know is there are a big group of voters who hear this language and just sort of think, actually, that's not me. And I think it's particularly damaging for Rishi Sunak, because what we know at the moment is Rishi Sunak is struggling to appeal to the Red Wall voters who elected Boris Johnson, those voters who switched from Labour to the Conservative for the first time in 2019. He's not appealing to them, but he is actually doing much better amongst more sort of Cameronite blue wall voters. And I think the worry for him is that actually this doesn't win over those Red Wall voters, because some of them, a good chunk of them will find the comments cruel, but more, those voters aren't going to shift until they start to feel materially better off. They need the economy to change. But those blue wall voters start to think, actually, this isn't a government that I'm comfortable with. I don't like this sort of rhetoric that I'm hearing. I just about held my nose and voted for Boris Johnson in 2019 because I didn't like Jeremy Corbyn, even though I wasn't a particular fan of Boris. But I thought Sunak was different. I thought he was going back to that Cameronism. And so there's a real danger that it doesn't win the government any friends in the Red Wall, but actually alienates a lot of more liberal-leaning voters.
So to what extent do you think that we can say that actually Braverman staying in the government at this point now is actually causing Sunak more harm than good with the electorate?
Well, I think there's a third factor to consider. Leave aside the content of what she said, leave aside the tone of what she has said. This has now become an issue of the Prime Minister's authority. And what we certainly know from our focus groups right across countries, the public are exhausted with chaos. They're exhausted with a sense that there's a government that's not really functional. They thought that the Sunak government was going to be different to all of that. They might have had worries he was out of touch, but at least he was going to run a steady ship. The problem is that every time now the government try and have a relaunch, something blows it off track. So this week, the King's Speech totally derailed by Suella's comments, giving the impression of a government in chaos. And I actually think that now, more than the content or tone of what Suella said, is why Rishi Sunak needs to be bold and get her out of his government, because otherwise his authority looks weak. It looks like it's going to be ongoing chaos. We know that she's not going to stop making these comments. If he wants to convince the electorate he's running a serious ship, the only way I think to do that now is to have a government that doesn't have Suella Braverman in it.
Just finally, Luke, I wonder what you think about this. Do you think that there is a theory of the way that this government has unfolded over the years since the 2019 election, where, in a way, one of their problems has been, sort of time and again, under different prime ministers and manifesting itself in different ways, they've sort of misunderstood what the 2019 election was about, that they've become obsessed, and Suella Braverman, you could argue, is a sort of perfect embodiment of this, have become obsessed with a particular idea of what they think the Red Wall in particular, and the voters who delivered them the 2019 election result want and wanted. And that actually, in so many ways, that is kind of off the mark of what they actually are, who they are, and what they wanted.
Completely. I think across a whole series of issues, the Tory right in particular has projected this view of Red Wall voters that actually just doesn't bear up to reality. So what attracted Red Wall voters to Boris Johnson in 2019? Well, more than anything else, it was getting Brexit done, and it was the done part of it even more than the Brexit part of it. People just wanted to move on. Also, it was, Boris Johnson's promises around investing in the NHS. It was things about levelling up. And obviously, for some, migration was an issue as well. But what I think they have done is they've misread that result. They've ignored all of those factors and instead assumed that it is a real play to the very authoritarian right that these voters want. But when you talk to Red Wall voters in focus group, that doesn't match up. So, there are lots of people in the Conservative Party who think that Lee Anderson is the silver bullet when it comes to, winning back Red Wall voters. But you talk to him about his comments about, being able to make a meal on, 30 pence, or, nurses shouldn't be using food banks. And the public laugh. They think it's just as out of touch. And, Red Wall voters think it's cruel as well. Ditto, you've seen the same thing on climate change. all of our polling shows that red wall voters are just as, if not more, actually, in some cases, concerned about climate change than other groups of voters. And yet you've got this sense of Tory right of, they don't care about this stuff. And then ditto on stuff like homelessness. So it's a projection. I happen to think it's quite patronising projection on these voters. And actually, if they spent more time talking to them rather than assuming what they think, they'd find that actually, number one, what do this group of voters want? They want to be able to go to the supermarket and not have to put stuff back because the weekly shop's too expensive. And they want to be able to get a GP appointment when they need one.
Now, it is true, as Luke was alluding to, that some polls suggest the public really aren't happy at all about these protests, particularly on Armistice Day or the Remembrance Weekend. But the public's pretty split on the substance as well. About half supporting Israel, half Palestine, often variated on age and demographic lines with which we become familiar. But on politics overall, the irony, it seems to me, is that those voices we hear so often slamming so-called liberal elites are themselves often just out of touch, just as isolated as to how the average member of the public perceives politics as the liberals they decry. The only difference is, those on the right often don't seem to know it. They believe the opposite. They look to America and they think society here is as polarised as it is there, that the cleavages are the same, and so often they're simply not. Simply put, working class voters in the Red Wall and elsewhere are often not what elite Tory ministers and elite Conservative supporting newspapers would like them to be. They are more complicated, and their politics doesn't always neatly overlap with theirs. But this notion of them, this idea of them, rather than the fact, is part of the reason why someone like Suella Braverman keeps rushing to the extremes, irrespective of what she really believes. In a sense, they're chasing a ghost all the time. David Skelton is a Conservative writer who has thought deeply about these issues.
The message of the 2019 election and the 2016 referendum should have been clear. People who had been belittled in places like my hometown of Consett in County Durham, that had been ignored for too long in the decades since deindustrialisation, responded to a message of hope and economic renewal after decades of decline. This was able to shift voting habits that went back more than a century. Sadly, many on the right have learnt the wrong lesson from 2019 and have built up a misguided caricature of working class voters. Too many on the right have decided to ignore economic reform and are now focusing purely on issues like immigration and an obsession with so-called wokery. This is a mistake based on over-indexing online voices and misunderstanding what drives people in the Red Wall. Ignoring economic reform also means that parts of the right can retreat to a comfort zone that ignores electoral realities and ignores what has really driven the votes of working class people in post-industrial areas. The truth is that people in the so-called Red Wall want economic revival in their area after decades of decline. They want good, well-paid jobs they can be proud of and strong local manufacturing industries. Levelling up and reindustrialisation matters so much more than online-fueled culture wars to working class voters in the kind of seats that were absolutely crucial in the 2019 election.
David's right. It feels sometimes as if those at the top of the Conservative Party have spent a little bit too much time on the internet. The Tories have internalised the wrong lessons from the 2019 results and from Brexit, that in some ways they're blinded only by a reflection of what they think the Red Wall is. Different wings of the party, whether Suella Braverman with her particular brand of the culture war, or Liz Truss and her economic agenda, or even Sunak with his tech revolutions, all want to see something that often isn't there. The person who, whatever you think about him, and to his credit, probably understood those voters best, or that election or referendum best, was Boris Johnson, whose own expansive brand of Toryism, a little right on social, quite left on the economy, best embodied the political economy of where the Tory party ended up through those votes. But he had neither the application, nor the probity in truth, to see the change through. As it is, the Conservative Party finds itself in a state of some ruin unable to agree on the politics which drove them to where they are, perhaps destined to spend some time in opposition, thinking about what might have been different. We'll be back just after this. Now, before we go, as always, we love an election here on the News Agents, and you may remember that back in June I went out to Spain to report on the Spanish elections for the show. Vox, the far-right party, was supposed to be on the march. The Spanish Socialists, the PSOE, led by PM Pedro Sánchez, supposed to be kicked out, and it didn't quite work out that way. In the end, the PSOE and the Conservative Party, the Partido Popular, or PP, ended up in a dead heat. The impasse, forming a new government, has only this week, months later, finally been resolved, but at a price. Sánchez has agreed to give an amnesty for those leading Catalan nationalist politicians who led the efforts for an illegal independence referendum some years ago, some of whom have been in exile ever since in exchange for their vote supporting his government in the new parliament. This has created huge tension in Spain, especially in Madrid, where the streets have been gripped by protests at the news. Throw into that an attempted murder on the streets of Madrid yesterday of the founder of the far-right Vox party. He was shot in the jaw, and you have a Spanish political scene altogether which feels, at the least, very uncertain. And we thought we'd check in, given we've covered the story closely on the show, and speak to Juan Navarro García, a journalist from El País newspaper.
This week, Junts per Catalunya and el PSOE of Pedro Sánchez decided to go on. It's fine, it's done. So that people went to the street, and I suppose you have seen the videos and the way in which there have been fights with the police, with the people, with the media. Many of the people are from right or far-right parties, such as Vox or neo-Nazis people.
So to be clear, what has happened is that the Prime Minister, Pedro Sánchez, who everyone assumed would lose the election, has managed to negotiate a deal with the Catalan separatists, and the cost of that deal has been an amnesty, and that has created huge consternation, huge unrest on the right of politics.
Yes, but Sánchez had not other option. He didn't win the elections, but he had the choice, he had the possibility of making deals with other parties, regionalist parties, localist parties, and the Catalanian said, okay, or we have an amnesty, or for you it will be impossible to keep on the government. They have been negotiating in Brussels a long time. The right party was not very happy because they won the elections, the Popular Party won, but they have no way of making a government because without Vox, the extreme right party, they are not able to do nothing.
What we've seen this week, haven't we? We've seen huge demonstrations on the streets of Madrid and other Spanish cities in protest against this action.
Yes, the main movement has been in Madrid because Madrid is a very particular city whose people live in are very, I don't know how to say it, very nationalist, very Spanish nationalist. Yes. So they went to the street.
One other thing, there was the shooting, wasn't there, yesterday, of the founder of the far-right Vox party, Alejo Vidal-Quadras. He was shot in the jaw yesterday in Madrid.
It's been very weird. People didn't expect something like that. At the beginning, with this situation, this atmosphere, people said something has decided to take the justice on their own, and they tried to kill this man. But he has undergone surgery, and he said that the attack could be due to his ties with the Iranian opposition, which is the source of Vox initial finances.
So this, in a weird way, potentially has a connection to the politics of the Middle East as much as it does to the politics of Spain, potentially.
Yes, because I don't know if you remember when Podemos, with the other allied of Sánchez, was supposed to have money from the Iranian tyranny, but it was never ever proved in the jury and in any other place. But Vox, people know, and it has been asserted that the beginning 1 million of euros came from the Iranian opposition, and it's supposed Vidal-Quadras said that it was probably these people who shot him yesterday in Madrid.
So finally, Juan, I mean, you've got a situation where the government has been taken a long time to negotiate, very uncertain elections, protests in the street, and for whatever reason, a politician being shot in the face in Madrid, it must feel like a pretty uneasy time in Madrid and in Spanish politics right now.
Yes, it's difficult, but we have also to say that when Pedro Sanchez got to the power, the media said the same. It's going to be a hell. It's going to be very difficult to make a government of this. But we have the pandemic, we have the Ukraine war, and the Spain data is not that bad. The situation is not that bad in the economy, So we'll see. I mean, these weeks are going to be very difficult. Just the governing parties are able to keep on the social policies that are making these years. We'll probably see how this souffle starts going down. But if the Catalonian party, instead of accepting this agreement and relaxing a little bit their position, if they go again, I don't find it probably, but if they go again to the fight, it will be very difficult to make this a reliable situation for the economy, for the people, and for not only the political stuff, but the agreement of the people in the street, the way in which people start discussing this crispation, this angriness you see when you talk with people taking a beer or going to the street and you find people who don't think or don't have the same beliefs as you.
That is it from all of us for this week. Unfortunately, John and Emily couldn't be here today. They're off to Flitwick in Bedfordshire for an escape room weekend with Nadine Dorries to celebrate the publication of her new book. Apparently, the good thing is that the organisers think there has rarely been a better incentive to complete the game. Booby prize is, if you don't get out, you have to read it. Remember, you can catch up on all our shows from this week on Global Player and send story tips and feedback to newsagents@global.com. Thanks to our production team on the Newsagents, as always, Gabriel Radis, Laura Fitzpatrick, Georgia Foxwell, Alex Barnett, Rory Simon, Jack Mackay and Arvind Bardawal. Our editor is Tom Hughes. The executive for Global is Vicky Etchells. It's presented by Emily, had my first Wendy's in South Carolina Maitlis, John stalking the mayor of Detroit Sopel, and me, Lewis Goodall. We'll see you on Monday. Have a lovely weekend.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.